Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today, the Stephen King's The Fog has rolled in and it's pretty cold, so I'm going to try and keep this one brief. And it's good that I want to keep this one brief because today we're drawing the Phantasm. I'm going to be talking a lot about drawing shadows. We're going to be doing some stuff with negative space. I think that's the right word. You'll see what I mean when I show it to you. Because this one should be pretty easy, in theory. Because as I said, we're doing some stuff with shadows. We're gonna be using a lot of clear dark space. But you'll see what I mean in a minute. And by that I mean as soon as the intro's finished rolling, which will be now. Okay, so this is what I have. Now, allow me to explain. So, you will quickly notice that I have not actually drawn very much of the body. And the reason for that is that because the entire background is going to be black. And I'm going to be using pure dark black for most of this. So what I'm going to be doing is all the areas of this that should have black in them are going to be pure black. There's going to be no sort of light line or anything like that on it. And we're doing a lot of shadow stuff. So now, I mentioned negative space. Negative space, what that means is to say it is the space surrounding, this is a paraphrase of the definition that I remember reading. It is the space around what is important, i.e. our subject. So the idea of the sort of subject of this would sort of be the cloak and the cloak, the mask, and the bladed glove. So, when we are going to be applying our shadows, all of this is going to be a uniform black. We're not going to be really see much of the detailing of this. I've given light bits of detailing to certain areas, which I feel like maybe need it a little bit more. We will see how some of this works because I'm going to be sort of kind of fudging some of this a little bit, I think. Now, obviously, this will cut off in such a way where it will give you a vague shape of the leg, but not much more than that. I was thinking about maybe having a little bit of smoke or something along the bottom, but if I do that, I'll have it over everything. I was going to have it behind everything so that way you'd see more of the shape of the leg, but I also that would mean I'd have to put more work in. To put it bluntly, that would mean I'd have to put more work in, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to leave it as is. And if I put smoke in, I'll put some mist over the bottom of it, which I suppose is appropriate given the weather today. Anyways, the Phantasm as a design is very, very simple. It's just the mask, the cloak, the glove, and then there should be another glove back there. But let's just say that it's behind this. It's behind the torso. Then the boots are also grey. Now, again, we're dealing with literally one colour here, which is grey. And also the silver of this glove, and I'll make that silver the mask as well, because why not? I might apply some sort of like light misting around the eyes, just that has a sort of a spooky effect to it. I think, if memory serves, this was one of the ones which I wrote down as a potential Halloween video. That ship has certainly sailed by now, but here we are. Anyways, I don't think there's a huge amount I need to really go over. Again, as I say, the negative space thing we're going to be doing is just going to sort of be pure black, and we're going to be getting just the shape of this. Now, also in terms of shadows, something which I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be shading all of these so they're sort of blending into the darkness. So I'm going to pretty much be using my paintbrushes that I'm going to be using for all this. I'm going to be using like black basically as the sort of paint, and I might make it a bit of an inkier paint this time just so that it sort of blends a bit more, because I do want it to sort of blend in. Now there's a brush which I used a little while ago it was for one of the speed art videos, bizarrely. It was for the Mr. Freeze speed art video. I used it to sort of apply, I used it for his face, just so that it would give it a sort of kind of it would look kind of glistening, but also not like a clean skin, like a sort of a like it was the light hitting sort of skin paint. Again, like it is in the film, obviously not in the context of the movie, but in the context of the actual real thing. It is face paint, so I decided to use that paintbrush to sort of give it that look. So I might try and use a bit of that. I'll experiment with some stuff here. I've got time. This will be a very quick one, so I've got the time to sort of experiment with stuff and try some weird stuff here. So in theory, I should be able to come up with something that'll look a little bit more interesting. Because again, as I said, this is a bit of an experiment in a few different things. I've been trying a few of these different weird little experiments. I did the Shadowcat one, which had some sort of experiments with lighting and things like that. And I tried sort of interspersing a few little things like that. And it was sort of what I did with the Sakura one, the Street Fighter drawing from not that long ago. That one, yeah, I was sort of experimenting with some lighting stuff there, with some sort of more pale, soft pastel color tones, and this time I'm experimenting more with shadows. So we'll see what I can come up with. But I suppose, without further ado, I will just start. I might alter the shape of the cape a little bit because I feel like it's maybe a little short. It's supposed to be like hooking up, but it actually just looks like it's just too short. So I might make it a little longer, just for the sake of making that look a little bit cleaner. So yeah, I might make some of these bits a bit longer, just so that it sort of glides down here. And then if I do apply a bit of mist or anything to the bottom of the frame, it'll just sort of disappear into that. In theory. Again, we're going to be doing more. I think the shadows are more of what I'm interested in as opposed to mist, really. So I might not do the mist at all. Again, it's a paint thing, so that's later's problem. Anyways, I'll start. Now, that is our details done. So, I only filled in this much with just the details of the actual just full black there, because the rest of this I'm just going to fill in the background as black, but I'll do that after I've done the colors, so that obviously I can see what I'm doing, because I'm just filling it in now as pure black. I'm not going to be able to tell what the hell I'm doing. So I'll put in my background color now. I'll just put in a temporary color. I'll just put in like the blue or something like that, just like a kind of mid blue, something Yeah, something dark enough that I can see what I'm doing with the eyes, but not dark enough that I can't see what I'm doing otherwise. So right, I'll do that as part of the colors, and then obviously then I'll fill in the background as the black after that. I might maybe do a few bits and pieces with the background. I really don't feel like it's necessary, but we'll see how I feel about it once I'm done with this. Because my painted shading is going to be very different this time than how it was before. The colors are obviously going to be very quick. There's only 3 colors to do. There's the eyes, which are going to be... There's the eyes, which are going to be a kind of a whitey, kind of a slightly bluey color. And if I put in some of that mist, which I think I will, I think I'll put in the eye mist. I think that's a nice feature to put in. Let's just hope I don't forget to do it. It'll be in the painted shading anyway, so it probably won't be too hard to remember. Given that there's not much else that I have to do here. But yeah, I'll do this sort of eye mist and something like that, just that'll kind of give it a bit, it'll sort of spruce it up a little bit. I'll put in a few like little bits of like glinting along the silver, just so that looks a little bit more interesting, just to do a little gradient, sort of little flicks like that along that, so that'll give it a little bit of something going on. And then, yeah, so... I don't think I'll be doing any sort of mist or anything like that down there. I do feel like, just to sort of recap the details, that it maybe took a little longer than I would have liked. I did make some adjustments. Obviously, I brought in the cape a little bit here because I felt like the sort of... It just looked like it was billowing in a weird way. And I obviously I added a little bit more outer cape there. So that sort of gives more of the shape of the body a little bit. I extended down the sort of front, kind of almost poncho-y bit of the cape at the front, just so that it sort of flows out a little bit more, and you can obviously see here that sort of flowing out a little bit more. Some bits of the cape here are sort of flowing a bit rigidly, you know, they're kind of a little bit too horizontal. You want it to sort of be angled a little bit more like this. So some of them are a little rigid looking, some of the bits, but obviously whenever you're drawing a torn cape, it takes a while. I understand. Well, I don't understand why Todd McFarlane ever did that to himself with all the torn long capes. Seems a little maddening to me, but anyways, I only have to do it for this one, and if I ever do it again, who knows? This one, again, it wasn't that hard. It was just it was easily the most time-consuming part of this whole thing. Let me just switch back to white for a second here, just so I can see in a bit more detail what I'm looking at. So yeah, I made the mask a little bit more detailed because originally the mask was very basic. As you can see, I sort of originally was just going to have just the front core piece be the visible bit, but I decided to include these side bits as well. Now, I obviously changed how they look. They're visible in the film, but obviously the mask is much more simple in the film. This mask is generally a little bit more pulled from the more modern comics to a degree. A lot of this is very much more film than comic, but the mask is a bit more comic than film. And yeah, some of the sort of added detailing here is a little bit more technological than how it looks in the film. A lot of stuff in sort of animated series era is all very sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's all fairly kind of simple. I mean, that's part of that is by nature of the art style, but a lot of it is sort of more brutalist looking because of that. Well, I mean, I don't want to say brutalist, but like obviously Gotham City in the animated series is very Art Deco, which means it's all very long and sleek, and that's even how the Batmobile is designed in that world. Whereas again, it's long and sleek, and it's not super detailed, which obviously that's an advantage for animation whenever things are simpler, because it makes it easier to do. But when it comes to sort of the Phantasm as a whole, the mask is more of a sort of big, thick piece. And yeah, you only get that sort of interior sort of skeletal face to a degree. It's a little subtler in the film. It sort of just comes in as a straight line there, straight down, straight line there, straight down. And the sort of bottom jaw of it is a little bit, it's flat. It's not got this sort of point that I've added to it. I'm seeing, well, some of them have a point, some of them have a point. That's not mine, really. Some of them have a point, most of them are sort of flat. Generally the bottom is flat, but I decided to point it just because I think it looks a little bit more interesting here, to add a few more points, because I mean there's a lot of points here. It's all points, everything's very pointy in this design. But yeah, realistically, what's strange is that the like blade hand has never gotten more complicated. It's always kind of looked the same. It's always kind of just been the big kind of central tube piece, and then the two blades. Sometimes the secondary blade is a little bigger. I chose to just keep it small. And then make the long one big, and it's a bit more hooked the way that I've drawn it. A lot of the time you see it and it's fairly straight, but I've made it a bit more hooked because that seems a bit more practical as a weapon that way. Now I haven't actually, it's something which I maybe should mention, is I haven't, well, I still kind of did it, but recently I've been giving things very hard dark edges. I haven't done that quite as much here because the background is going to be pure black, so you're really not going to see it all that much. So I've not really done that here because, again, as I say, you're going to be seeing pure black for the background. So it just doesn't make as much of a difference. So I've mostly kept things fairly just sort of a bit hairier, a bit messier, especially along the sort of tears. They're a little hairy in places. That's fine, really. That's not too much of a problem. Anyways, I think that's enough rambling. I'll do these colours. Shouldn't take very long. There's only 3 of them. And then I'll be back to do the painted shading, which I'll have to do a little bit more introducing because, again, as I say, I'm going to be using different sort of brushes and things like that than I would normally do. I'm not going to be using the sort of watercolory look that I would normally go for. Anyways, I'll move on. Alright, so that's our colours done. Now, granted, I think I would probably be, it wouldn't even be that bad an idea to just end it here, in theory. But you know, we're gonna go just that step further in terms of effort. So we're gonna do our painted shading now. So this is obviously where our light's going to be coming from. Is going to be on this side. This is where the darker parts are going to be. Now I'm going to sort of darken the bits of the cake which are behind the leg here, as you can see. Obviously I had to go through and very finely erase down some of the edges here because since we're dealing with black as the background, it's a little bit more important to make sure that the edges are clean. So I went through and I did that. It didn't take very long, but it's more effort than I would normally do for that sort of thing. I normally wouldn't mind too much if there was a few sort of imperfect edges. So I went through and I cleaned all those up. I mean, there's probably a few pixels here or there which aren't exactly perfect, but I digress. So I think I am, technically speaking, going to have to find some sort of a color palette to work with here. Ordinarily, I think if, realistically speaking, in this sort of lighting environment, which is to say the void, it wouldn't really matter too much, realistically, what kind of color palette I go for, but I'm sort of going to need to worry about it for the gradient map, so I'll probably have to think about it anyways, even though there's only actually 2 colors I have to shade, being the silver and the grey. The silver is probably going to get shaded kind of harshly. I think a lot of this is going to be dealt with in terms of, yeah, the paints. I think I'm going to try and maybe go a little subtler on them with some of this stuff. I don't know. We'll see. We'll have to see how I sort of manage it, because I am going to be using black as my darkest for the shading, just in general. But yeah, we'll see how that obviously affects the paints, because yeah, I'm not going to be using one of my traditional watercolors either. I'm going to be using a harsher brush. Let me see if I can find it here. It should be right around here, I think. I think this is the brush. Let me have a quick peek and see if it is the brush. I think it is. I think that one right there is the one that I was using before. Yeah, no, that is the one. I'll just need to make it bigger. Because, yeah, this one's a bit coarse. So this should work. Because you can obviously see here, it gives you a fairly, like, thin line. Really, it doesn't give you much of a line, but it does disperse, and it gives you like kind of little. It looks almost grainy, is how I describe it. Grainy and or sparkly. That's obviously why it was useful for Mr. Freeze, because of the skin. But yeah, there's a few things I'm going to be doing with sort of light layers and little bits of glint and things like that, which I'll probably do within this section. Maybe after. I don't know. That feels like a final touches sort of thing. I will obviously be doing the kind of eye smoke here. So in that case, I might do the eye glint, because I was going to do a little dispersed eye glint, of it was going to be very subtle as a sort of like ever so slight bluish hue, like a little glint in both of the eyes, something small. But yeah, that then kind of disperses out, and it sort of then gets subsumed into the smoke. So it's the sort of thing which again, you'll kind of see it it's. When you break it down into its component elements, they aren't individually going to be too amazing, but I think the final product, it'll look a lot better. And I think that's sort of a lot of what we're dealing with here. Again, as I say, this would be fine to leave it like this, realistically. But again, as I say, I'm going to go a little bit further with it and see if I can make it look a little bit more interesting. But yeah, I probably won't end up using any of the sort of lower smokes or anything like that. It just sort of isn't necessary, I think. If I do, I'll very much localize it to about here. I think the negative space is better for that sort of thing. I think it's more interesting. It's more unique, because I normally wouldn't do that sort of thing, so it's a bit more unique that way. Anyways, I will do these paints, and then I'll be back to do the detailed shading. And well, I don't think I'll do a light line, but I'll be doing final touches and stuff like that. So anyways, I'll do these paints, and then I'll be back for that stuff. We'll obviously have a think about what I'm going to do with those elements, but yeah. Okay, that is our painted shading done. There isn't really much else left to do. I am only going to be doing very, very little detailed shading. I'm going to just basically be applying... it's not even really shading. I'm just going to be applying a little bit of light to the to certain edges, and that's about it. I'm also going to apply some glints and stuff like that. A few little glints along the blade, and some sort of eye glow of some variety. Something very minor like that. Nothing too crazy. Just sort of simple few last steps. I did 2 layers of paints, so let me demonstrate. So this is the sort of base gritty shading, and then I applied a softer shading over the top. So the grit is still very visible. You can still very clearly see it. This is obviously unsoftened, and this is softened. I went through obviously with a second paintbrush, a watercolor brush, and that just softened out some of the grittier edges. Now, obviously, as I say, the grit is still very visible, and I want it to remain very visible because that's sort of a big part of this here, is everything sort of bleeding in and out of the shadows. But yeah, so because of that sort of gritty those gritty bits of shading, I wanted to keep those there, but I also felt like it was maybe a little much on its own, so I obviously softened it a little bit. But ultimately, it's still very much correct, I think. So now, yeah, as I say, the detail shading is going to be very minor. I also did the smoke in the eyes, but it's very minor. That'll get sort of whenever I put in the gradient maps and everything, that'll sort of get a bit crushed down to the point of where it'll be a little softer. The eye glint will also the eye glows will sort of help with that as well. We'll sort of disperse into that and it'll look a little nicer. But yeah, so realistically speaking, this is going to be very brief. This section, it will probably take me about 10 minutes real time to do this section. So really, yeah, all I've got to do is I've got to do a little bit of lighting stuff. I'm not doing a light line, so that's about. I've just literally got to do a little bit of a line along some of these edges just to sort of clean it up a little bit and just apply a little bit of a nicer sort of edge to it, a nice cleaner edge to some of the lighter parts. But that's it for that. And I've got to do some little sort of little glows and things like that. But that's it. That's all I got to do. Nothing too crazy. Shouldn't take too long. So without further ado, I'll get into it. Oh, I've also got to do gradient maps. So yeah. Anyways, I'll do all that stuff and I'll be back to wrap up. So yeah. Alright, well that's that. I did my the little extra bits of detailing there, put in the little glints along the claw hand, and I also put in my little bit of eye glow. So I set this, I did some interesting stuff with the eye glow. I set it to be a lighten layer, which I would normally not do, but it sort of it disperses nicely into the smoke. God, my brain failed me there for a second. But yeah, I also set up my first gradient map, which I set to be an overlay, which I normally wouldn't do. I'd normally put it as a soft light, but I feel like the overlay is a little... Again, it makes more sense to go for something more intense here because we want it to blend directly into the background, so that's better. And for that same reason, I'm not sure what I'm going to do for the texture, because I kind of want to keep everything very much that way. Right, let's set this one to be a luminosity, set this to be a low one. Just got to do these last couple of gradient maps. I think this looks better whenever it's below everything. I think it would be nice if it's darker. So right, let's get this to be a color burn. Set this to be 10%. Kind of want this to be a bit higher. Yeah, I think 10% works for that. It's a little higher than I'd normally put a color burn. Right, now let's grab our texture and that'll be us. I want to see how the texture looks, but I might actually use it. I might not actually use the texture. Yeah, I might not actually use the texture. Let's just see, because it might interact weirdly with the background, given that the background is just flat black. Curious. Or it might not really interact with it at all. Yeah, let's be 20%. Let's actually just see if I can actually even see it. Well, good news, I suppose. It doesn't really interact with the background. That's fine. I can turn that up to be as high as I want, really. 40%. I think we actually want this to be pretty high because we want the character to be quite gritty. Again, we don't want it to be so much so that it sort of just destroys everything, but I think 40% is actually good. 40% is what I used to use, just for clarity. It's what I used to use a very long time ago in the earlier episodes, because I didn't quite have as much of a handle on the texture. But nowadays I tend to make it a little bit subtler. But yeah, I think the 40% actually looks good here, because again, it just adds a bit of life into some of these areas, adds a little bit of natural sort of dispersion. To some of it, again, it sort of lightens up a lot of the brighter bits. Doesn't really make anything too much darker. It just sort of, again, makes some of these areas a little lighter. As you can see, the the glints the metal becomes much shinier looking, so the glints there seem a little bit more realistic, I suppose. Is how I would put it. Yeah, they seem a little less unnatural whenever there's that much shine coming off of just the metal itself. So yeah, that works, I suppose. And the eye glow looks a little bit nicer as well here. The smoke isn't quite as invisible because the smoke does disappear a little bit, but I think it works. Anyways, yeah, that was our little bit of shadow play, I suppose. That was a reasonably quick one, I'd say, even though it still took 3 hours. But most of that was just because of tinkering around and experimenting. Ultimately, I'm pretty happy with that. I think it came out quite nicely. Yeah. So yeah, we went through and we did all the sort of shadow stuff. We did some negative space, obviously. Well, I mean that's the whole point of this is negative space. Again, I was thinking about doing a bit of a smoke along the bottom here, just to sort of have a bit something going on background wise. But I think it looks much better without it. I think we have enough smoke with the eyes. I think that's enough. Just sort of having the sort of trails coming off of the eyes. I think that's plenty. If anything, you know what? I'm going to actually lower the opacity on that smoke a little bit because I want it to disappear a bit more. I want it to disappear a little bit more. You can lower it a bit more. 30%. Yeah, it sort of disappears a little bit more now. The trail is a little bit more subtle. 25? Yeah. Yeah, definitely, I would say. Definitely 25, I would say, is what we want. Bit subtler. Bit subtler. Sort of, yeah, it disappears a little bit as it's going away. I mean, on the screen in front of me, because obviously the screen in front of me here is much darker below me, I mean to say. Yeah, the tablet screen is much darker, so the smoke is basically invisible, but that's not fully accurate to how you'd see it on a lot of other screens, so... my monitor in front of me is a little lighter, so that's a bit more accurate to general screens. But yeah, I think is there anything else I need to really cover here? I don't think there is, to be honest. I think that's kind of it. Yeah, I already talked through all my negative space and shadows stuff. But yeah, the sort of thing with our lighting here is it's high highs and low lows in terms of contrast. Very high contrast. Now, and what I mean whenever I say that is obviously our lighter parts are very bright and our darker parts are pitch black. So everything sort of kind of bleeds in and out of the background into such a way of where again, like you've got stuff like the full claw hand here, where parts of it are just fully black. And again, it's not like inky shadows really. It's all still very sort of painted in and kind of gritty. But it just sort of uses that other brush that I don't use very much. Again, I think it's a good brush. That's sort of our central thing with this is I've been mostly using that brush for a lot of this. But yeah, this is the type of thing where it's an experiment. It's not the type of thing I do very much because of, again, it's not the type of thing that always works. Like doing the 2 different painting layers, that would be sort of impractical for most characters. The only reason I would do it here is because I wanted to do the sort of shadow stuff. And for the Phantasm, it sort of works because most of the design is black. So again, to sort of have that bleed into the background makes sense to a degree, I think. So yeah, I've been sort of waiting around to do a sort of shadows kind of thing, but I think this is it. I think this is a good representation of it. I think it's a good fun one to have done. But yeah, I think that's enough wrap up. I think it's time to just do the outro and then I will say goodbye. So, if you liked the video, do whatever it is that you'd normally do, whether that be liking or not. I'd of course prefer if you liked it, but I can't make you do that, so, you know, all I can do is politely suggest it, which I believe I've done. It's the same deal. If you want to subscribe, go for it. There's nothing stopping you. It's free. But yeah, you've presumably seen a YouTube video before, so you don't need to be told where the subscribe button is. It's below the video. I didn't have to tell you that, but I did. It's courtesy. And if you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see me draw in the future, you could leave a comment, politely worded. If you're not going to do it politely, just don't do it at all. And if you choose to watch the next video, I will see you next time. So, with all that said, that is us. So I'll say goodbye and then I'll leave you. So, bye-bye.